The Korean War was a military act of which the South was supported by the United Nations and the North was supported by the Soviet Union. The North wanted to unite the two Koreas into one and create a stable communism governance, but the South disagreed and wanted a democracy governed. Both sides, not agreeing, went to war. General MacArthur's plan of attacking the port city Incheon was launched on September 15, 1950. Starting out with a disagreement, a surprise invasion, and a huge loss, the South Koreans had made a comeback. The victory of the Battle of Incheon was a turning point in favor of the United Nations. The North Koreans were pushed back across the 38th parallel, having the South Koreans recapturing Seoul and keeping the spread of communism out of South Korea. Lasting exactly 1,138 days and with 5 million soldiers and civilians dead, the North and South Koreans had signed a ceasefire and ended the Korean War on July 27, 1953. The end results of the Korean War were the same as before, with the Korean peninsula still divided by the 38th parallel. The division of Korea began in 1945 when the British Commonwealth, the Soviet Union, and the United States of America allied together and won World War II. With the surrender of the Empire of Japan, Korea, which was ruled by the Empire of Japan from 1910 up to September of 1945, was put in the hands of the Allied. The United Nations and Soviet Union agreed to establish Korea as a trusteeship with an organized democracy governed over the 38th parallel. Although elections were scheduled, the United States declined the partnership with the United Nations plans of having a democracy govern over both the two Koreas. The North, getting the idea from Soviets, wanted a communist government. The South, getting the idea from Americans, wanted a democracy government. Both sides were greatly influenced because of the Japanese occupation. The Japanese occupation inspired the progress of both sides, which was how they knew about the two types of government. On June 15, 1950, the North Koreans invaded the South Koreans across the 38th parallel. The South Koreans were stunned and had no immediate emergency plan ready. Attacks came from all along the border. Their goal was to head west of the Korean peninsula towards South Korea's capital Seoul. Eventually, they captured Seoul. It was the start of the Korean War. By August of 1950, the North Koreans had pushed the South Koreans to Busan, a city located on the peninsula of Korea. General MacArthur came up with a bold and strategic plan of attacking the city Incheon, which is 100 miles south of the 38th parallel and 25 miles from Seoul. Incheon, a port city, averaged a difference of 31 feet between low and high tide, having some of the worst tides on the shores in the world. It had many large buildings that could be used against them, whereas enemies can launch sniper fires or assaults. Not only, if the timing of the attack were not precise, they would just make themselves perfect targets for the enemies. Even so, General MacArthur demanded on carrying out the landing on Incheon because they were being pushed farther and farther south of the Korean peninsula.
Why did they not stop General MacArthur? And the answer is because he was Douglas MacArthur. He was Douglas MacArthur, almost a myth in the minds of the American people. I would say to you that if that had been recommended by anyone other than General Douglas MacArthur, I believe it would have been stopped.
General MacArthur's goal of attacking Incheon was to use it as a base attack, and to cut off the North Korean supply line and communication. It would force the North Koreans to come away from the attacks on the remaining UN forces in the Busan perimeter. From there, they would make their way into Seoul. On September 15, 1950, the attack of Incheon was launched. A flotilla was assembled off of Incheon and bombardments were fired by air and sea. Over 75,000 troops, along with 261 naval vessels, took part in the invasion.
We spent the whole night awake in the school playground, and in the early morning heard the artillery firing prior to the landing. And there were flashes of very bright light, so that one could see insects crawling about in front of the school. They continued to bomb heavily, and everywhere was a sea of flames. When one looked over Incheon City, the whole city was glowing red, like a sea of flames. It was like this the whole night. When I woke up in the morning, I heard people say that the United Nations Army was coming.
The North Koreans were taken in surprise and had their supply line cut off, along with half their men killed. With the North Koreans pushed back across the 38th parallel and almost to the Yalu River, the South Koreans recaptured Seoul. The invasion was a success. After the Battle of Incheon, the North Korean army had lost more than 35,000 men killed and captured. United Nations victims during the Battle of Incheon and Battle for the City were 566 killed and 2,713 wounded. On September 29, 1950, General MacArthur formally restored Seoul to the Republic of Korea President Syngman Rhee. By October 19, 1950, the South Koreans captured North Korea's capital, Pyongyang. The Chinese, feeling threatened after the non-stop pushing of the North Koreans across the Yalu River, decides to join in the war on November 1, 1950. The U.S., considering of getting rid of the Marine Corps, as amphibious landings were no longer important after World War II, were saved by the Battle of Incheon as if it was an amphibious landing itself. The Battle of Incheon stopped the spread of communism. South Korea today has a democracy government. The Korean War coming to an end left great damages to Korea. North and South Korea's economy and infrastructures were poor due to many bombings and artillery strikes. South Korea, with the help of the US, were able to modernize and industrialize. North Korea was a contrast compared to South Korea. Their economy by the 1980s were poor. North Korea today is still remained in poor condition and is ruled under Kim Jong-un. Overall, the Korean War was just a draw. Korea today still remains with the 38th parallel separating the two.